On a cold night in the American West, Vanessa Turner never imagined her life would change forever. When she followed her runaway pig to a cave in the mountains, she found something no one could have predicted. A woman, gravely injured, holding a baby in her arms with a bag of money lying next to them. In a moment of panic, Vanessa didn't know what to do, but what happened next would change not only her life but the entire town's forever. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The sun was slowly setting on the horizon, painting the sky orange and red as Vanessa Turner walked across the dry field toward the pig pen on her father's farm. With the cold desert wind biting at her skin, she thought about the work she still had ahead. Simple tasks in an isolated life. It was all she knew. Her father, John Turner, ran a small but sufficient farm. He always said life in the West demanded a different kind of strength, and Vanessa knew that strength was something she had inside her. But today, something felt different. When she noticed one of the pigs escaping the pen, she decided to chase after it, a task that, most of the time, was a futile effort. Pigs were unpredictable, like anything else in the West, but Vanessa was used to those challenges. She followed it for a good while, until the pig ran off into a more remote part of the farm near the hills. When Vanessa reached the top of a small rise, her eyes fixed on something strange. Something about the cave in front of her felt off. A low sound, almost drowned by the wind, echoed from the rocks. A baby crying. Vanessa wasn't sure what to expect, but something deep inside urged her to go closer. Her feet moved over the rocks, her breathing filling the emptiness of the landscape. As she neared the cave's entrance, the sight froze her. A woman lay sprawled on the ground, pale skin stained with blood. Her body was still, and next to her a baby cried, breath quick and frantic. A bag of money lay discarded beside the woman, dirt and leaves scattered around it. Vanessa dropped to her knees beside the woman, her heart racing. The woman was gravely injured, a large pool of blood soaking her leg. The baby was silent now, but the desperate look in the woman's eyes made Vanessa feel an urgent need to act. Hey, are you okay?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling. But the woman didn't respond. Her body was cold to the touch, and her skin felt lifeless. She was on the brink of death. The baby, now with a confused and scared expression, stared directly at Vanessa, as if it knew she was its only chance of survival. It was a tiny baby, but the eyes were clear, intense, something Vanessa couldn't quite understand. Vanessa looked down at the money scattered around the woman. What was going on here? Who were these people? How had the woman and baby ended up here, in the solitude of the desert? And why would anyone leave a bag of money behind like this, without any explanation? She took a deep breath, making a choice that she knew would change everything. Not knowing what else to do, she gently scooped up the woman and the baby, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her. The decision was made. She was going to help them. Vanessa's hands trembled as she gently cradled the woman, whose blood-stained clothes stuck to her body. The baby in her arms had stopped crying, but the fear in its wide eyes remained, as if it understood the perilous situation they were all in. The wind picked up again, and the chill of the desert night settled into Vanessa's bones. She knew she couldn't leave them here, not when there was still a chance to save them. With a heavy heart and a growing sense of responsibility, Vanessa looked around, weighing her options. Her mind raced. She couldn't just leave this woman and child in the wilderness. They were someone's family. She had no idea who they were or how they ended up in such a state, but one thing was clear. They needed help, and she was the only one around to offer it. "Come on, let's get you out of here," Vanessa whispered, mostly to herself, as she lifted the woman carefully and began walking toward her farm. Her heart pounded as she moved, her mind filled with questions she didn't have answers for. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was getting them both to safety. The journey back to the farm felt longer than usual. Every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig under her feet, made her feel like she was being watched. She had no idea who this woman was or who might be looking for her. The presence of the bag of money raised even more questions, questions Vanessa didn't know how to answer. Was this woman a criminal? Had she stolen the money? Or was she simply a victim, caught in a situation beyond her control? Vanessa forced those thoughts to the back of her mind. The farm was still a good distance away, and she had to focus on getting there first. The woman's breath was shallow, and her face was pale, too pale for someone who still had a chance of survival. Vanessa tightened her grip on the woman, her determination growing. When she finally reached the farm, her father, John Turner, was outside, fixing a fence post. He looked up, his expression unreadable, as he saw Vanessa approaching with the woman and child. His face quickly shifted from confusion to concern. "Vanessa, what happened?" John asked, rushing to her side. "I found her, out by the ridge," Vanessa said, her voice trembling. "She's hurt and bad. I need your help, Pa. I don't know what happened, but we can't leave her out there." John looked at the woman, then at the baby in Vanessa's arms, his eyes narrowing. "Who is she?" "I don't know." Vanessa shook her head, her breath coming in short bursts. "But she needs help. She's not dead yet, Pa. We have to try." John didn't hesitate. "All right, bring her inside. We'll figure it out." Vanessa's heart lifted with relief as her father helped them inside the small farmhouse. Her father wasn't a doctor, but he was a man of action. He would do whatever he could to save this woman. He had to. As they laid the woman down on the bed, John examined her injuries, his brow furrowing with concern. "This is bad, Vanessa. She's lost a lot of blood. I'll do what I can, but we need to get her some proper help." Vanessa glanced at the baby, still in her arms, now quiet and calm. She hadn't thought about it before, but now she realized just how much the child had been through as well. It looked too young to have gone through such trauma, and yet, here it was, clinging to life just like its mother. "We'll need to keep an eye on both of them," John said, his voice steady, despite the obvious worry in his eyes. "We can't let our guard down, Vanessa. We don't know who's behind this, and we don't know what we're dealing with." "I know, Pa," Vanessa replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But right now, they need us. We'll figure out who they are later." As the night grew darker and the wind howled outside, the weight of their decision sank in. They had no idea what they had just brought into their lives. The danger, the uncertainty, it all seemed so overwhelming. But Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that she had made the right choice. She had no idea who this woman was or who was behind her, but the one thing Vanessa knew for certain was that she wasn't going to let anyone hurt her or her child, not while she had a say in it. Vanessa sat down in the corner of the room, her eyes locked on the injured woman and the sleeping baby in her arms. She felt a deep responsibility for them now. It wasn't just about helping someone in need, it was about something much bigger. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The night passed slowly. Vanessa could hear the wind outside, howling through the cracks in the farmhouse, but inside it was quiet, save for the soft sound of the woman's labored breathing. Vanessa stayed close, her eyes never leaving the woman as she slept fitfully, her face pale and covered in sweat. The baby had fallen asleep in her arms, content and peaceful for the moment, but Vanessa couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing in around them. John had done what he could, using what little medical knowledge he had to dress the woman's wounds, but it wasn't enough. She was still unconscious, and her chances of survival felt uncertain. Vanessa's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened, who this woman was, and why she was here, half dead in the middle of nowhere. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the windows, Vanessa stood up, careful not to disturb the woman or the baby in her arms. Her father was asleep in a chair near the fire, exhausted from his efforts to tend to the woman's injuries. Vanessa stepped quietly outside, needing to clear her mind. The air was still and cool, the dry dirt crunching beneath her boots. Her gaze turned toward the horizon, where the land seemed to stretch endlessly. The world was so wide and empty, and in that moment she felt the weight of how isolated they truly were. But that wasn't what troubled her. What kept her up the entire night was the lingering question: who was this woman? And more importantly, why had she been abandoned here? Vanessa glanced at the bag of money, still resting on the table where she had placed it the night before. It was almost comically out of place in their simple farmhouse, a symbol of something unknown and dangerous. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. This woman, Sarah, might not be just a victim. There was more to her story. The money was too much to ignore. Vanessa turned back to the house, but as she approached the door, a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Vanessa?" Her father was standing at the doorway, a hand on the frame, his expression grave. "Pa, is she—" Vanessa began, but her father interrupted her with a shake of his head. "She's not stable, but she's alive," he said, his voice tired but resolute. "But we can't keep her here. If she wakes up and remembers who she is, or where she's from—" Vanessa felt a chill at her father's words. It wasn't fear of the woman herself, but of what her appearance might mean. If someone was looking for her, if the people who had hurt her were out there, they would come for them too. "We don't have a choice," Vanessa said, her voice firm. "She's not going anywhere." John studied his daughter's face, his eyes softening with understanding. "I know, but we need to be careful, Vanessa. We don't know what we're getting into, and we don't know who we're dealing with." Vanessa nodded, the weight of his words settling in. She didn't know how long they could keep hiding this woman and her baby. It felt like time was running out. "Let's just get through today," Vanessa said quietly. "We'll figure the rest out later." With that, She returned to the house, her father following behind. She had made a decision, one that would shape their lives from here on out. They would help this woman no matter the cost, even if it meant facing whatever dangerous people were out there, lurking in the shadows. As she walked back into the room where Sarah lay, Vanessa's gaze lingered on the sleeping woman. Sarah's face was still pale, but there was a softness to her expression, something that made Vanessa believe she could trust her. Maybe that trust was foolish, maybe it would lead to something worse, but right now, it was all she had. Vanessa sat back down beside her father, who was already preparing a small meal for the two of them. As much as they needed food, the silence between them was heavier than any hunger. Neither of them spoke as they ate, both lost in their own thoughts. Vanessa kept stealing glances at the woman. She was waiting for Sarah to wake up, for her to say something, anything to explain what had brought her here. The truth felt like a stone in her chest, and Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that it was a truth she wasn't ready to hear. Then, as the hours passed, Sarah began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, weak and confused, and Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. "Are you all right?" Vanessa whispered, reaching for the woman's hand. "You're safe now." Sarah blinked up at her, her eyes dull and clouded. It took her a few moments to focus, and when she did, she stared at Vanessa with a mixture of recognition and fear. "My baby," Sarah whispered hoarsely, her voice ragged. "Where is my baby?" Vanessa looked over at the crib they had made for the baby, now peacefully sleeping. "He's fine," Vanessa said softly. "He's safe." Sarah's face softened with relief, but there was still fear in her eyes. She struggled to sit up, her body stiff from the wounds she had suffered. But when she tried to move, pain shot through her and she winced, sinking back into the bed. "Don't try to move too much," Vanessa said quickly. "You're still recovering, you've been through a lot." Sarah's eyes scanned the room, finally resting on Vanessa with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" Vanessa hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. She couldn't explain why she had chosen to help Sarah. Maybe it was the desperation in her eyes, or maybe it was the baby that had no one else to protect him. Whatever it was, Vanessa couldn't turn her back. "We're just people trying to survive," Vanessa said softly. "You don't have to explain anything, but you're safe here for now." Sarah's face softened at the words, but the wariness remained. Vanessa knew she couldn't keep pretending things were fine. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. "I'll take care of you both," Vanessa said, her voice filled with determination. "But we need to talk. We need to know who's after you. We need to know what's going on." Sarah hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the baby and then back to Vanessa. She swallowed hard before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll come for me," Sarah said, her eyes filled with dread. "They'll come for us, and there's nothing you can do to stop them." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Whoever they were closing in, and now there was no turning back. Vanessa's heart raced as Sarah's words sank in, the weight of them heavier than anything she had felt before. "They'll come for us." The warning hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like a storm cloud on the horizon. Who were they? And why was Sarah so certain that there was no way to stop them? For a moment, the room was quiet except for the baby's soft breathing. Vanessa glanced at her father, John, who had been silent, taking in the conversation. His face was hard, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes, concern for both Sarah and for their safety. They had offered help, but now they were entangled in something they didn't understand. "Who are they, Sarah?" Vanessa asked gently, trying not to overwhelm the fragile woman. "Who's after you?" Sarah took a long, shaky breath, her eyes flickering toward the baby, still swaddled in the corner of the room, safe for the moment. She seemed to wrestle with the weight of the truth, but finally, her voice broke the silence. "They're not just anyone," Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. "They're part of a gang led by a man named Victor Dane. He's a powerful man in the region, too powerful. He runs everything from illegal business to blackmail, and he's ruthless. He doesn't let anyone get away from him." Vanessa's stomach twisted at the name. She had heard whispers about Victor Dane, the rumors of his cruelty, his control over the land, and the people who lived under his thumb. But to hear it firsthand from someone who had lived through it made it all too real. "And you," Vanessa said. "What does he want with you? Why is he after you?" Sarah's face tightened, as if the memory of her ordeal was too much to bear. She looked down at her hands as if searching for the right words. "I'm the daughter of a wealthy family," Sarah admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "My father is a businessman with land, influence. He's been targeted by Dane before, but I didn't know how far it had gone until it was too late. They kidnapped me and my son. They wanted me to marry Dane's right-hand man to cement a deal, but I couldn't do that. So they planned to keep me locked away until I agreed. But when I got the chance, I ran. I ran for my life. Vanessa's heart broke at the pain in Sarah's eyes. The woman had suffered far more than anyone should have to. You ran, but why didn't you go to the authorities? Vanessa asked, confused. If Sarah had known the danger, why hadn't she gotten help sooner? Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Dane has control over everything. Everyone in town, the sheriff, the judges, they're all in his pocket. Anyone who stands against him ends up disappearing. That's why I couldn't go to them. I had to get away on my own. The air felt heavier with every word Sarah spoke. Vanessa's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together, but there was still so much they didn't know. Are you saying we can't trust anyone? Vanessa asked, her voice small with doubt. That we're alone in this? Sarah looked up at her, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. I'm afraid so. Dane has spies everywhere. He knows everything. John stood silently, his hand resting on the rifle near the door. He had been listening carefully, and when Sarah's words sank in, he nodded gravely. This is more than we bargained for, Vanessa, he said quietly. But we can't just send her away. We've already brought her here. We're in this together now. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Her father's words were true. There was no going back. They had to protect Sarah and the baby no matter the cost. I'll protect you both, Vanessa said, her voice firm, despite the fear clawing at her chest. We'll figure this out. Together. Sarah nodded, her eyes still haunted but filled with gratitude. I don't know how long we can hide. He won't stop looking for me. Vanessa knew Sarah was right. Time was running out. And in the silence that followed, it was clear that whatever they did next, they had to be ready. Victor Dane's reach was far, and his vengeance would be swift. John finally spoke, his voice low and steady. We'll keep them here as long as we can, but we need to move fast. Dane won't rest until he finds us. I'll go into town tomorrow. I'll see what I can find out. Vanessa nodded, her resolve hardening. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting. For Sarah, for the baby, for themselves. But more than that, they were fighting for something greater. The chance at a life free from fear, free from the shadows of men like Victor Dane. I'm going with you, Vanessa said, turning toward her father. I have to. I need to help. We can't do this alone. Her father met her gaze, and for a moment she saw the deep concern in his eyes. But then he gave a slow nod. All right, but we stay cautious. One wrong move, and we'll have a whole gang on our tails. Vanessa took a deep breath, her determination stronger than ever. They had made it this far. There was no turning back now. She looked at Sarah, who was trying to comfort her child, and then back to her father. The danger was real, but they would face it head-on. They would fight for survival. And no matter what came, Vanessa wouldn't back down. We'll get through this, Vanessa whispered, her voice resolute. Together. The sound of hooves in the distance echoed through the quiet of the evening. It was coming. The storm. The fight. And they were ready. The air was heavy with uncertainty as Vanessa and her father, John, prepared to head into town. The safety of their farm no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every movement, every creak of wood in the old house seemed to remind them that they were being hunted. As much as they had tried to hold on to the quiet life they knew, it had slipped through their fingers like sand, and now they had no choice but to face the storm head-on. John packed a small satchel with supplies, his rifle, some extra food, and a few coins. The world outside their door was unpredictable, dangerous, and they needed to be ready for anything. Vanessa watched him, the weight of everything pressing on her shoulders. There was no going back. They had chosen to stand with Sarah, and that meant they had to fight. We have to be careful, John warned, his voice low and serious. Victor Dane's reach is long, and we don't know who we can trust, but we can't sit here and wait for him to come to us. We need to find out how much control he really has over the town. Vanessa nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. She wasn't just going to sit by and wait either. She had to act. They had to act. Do you think the sheriff will help us? She asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. She had known Tommy Larson for years, but trusting anyone now felt like a gamble. If the sheriff was truly on Dane's side, their lives would be at even greater risk. John hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing. I don't know. Tommy's always been a man of principle, but these kinds of men, Dane's men, don't just play by the rules. He might be forced to keep quiet, but we have to try. Vanessa didn't like the doubt in her father's voice, but she understood it. They had been living in a world where right and wrong were often decided by whoever held the most power, and Victor Dane had a lot of power. With a final glance at the farmhouse, Vanessa turned and followed her father toward the horses. The day was still young and the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the land. The world outside felt different now, like a place that had been untouched, but now A dangerous presence was making itself known. As they rode through the barren countryside, the silence between them grew heavier. They passed familiar landmarks, the old mill, the creek they used to swim in when Vanessa was younger. But now everything seemed distant, as if the world had shifted and left them behind. Vanessa's thoughts kept returning to Sarah and the baby. What kind of life would they have now? Even if they escaped Victor Dane, could they truly find peace again? Sarah had already told them everything she knew about the gang, about how they had tried to force her into marrying one of Dane's men. It was a terrifying picture. A life of manipulation, coercion, and violence, ruled by a man who showed no mercy. The more Vanessa thought about it, the more she realized that their fight wasn't just for Sarah. It was for everyone living under Dane's thumb. They entered the town as the sun was beginning to set, the sky now painted with hues of purple and gold. The town felt smaller than Vanessa remembered, its buildings sagging and quiet, as though the life had been slowly drained out of it. The once bustling streets were now still, and only a few people walked around, their heads down, eyes avoiding contact. Vanessa's heart quickened as they rode past the saloon, where she spotted a few familiar faces, men who worked for Dane, rough, lawless types who always seemed to have a dark cloud hanging over them. Vanessa's grip tightened on the reins, her instincts telling her that danger was closer than she thought. She couldn't let them see her or her father. Every step they took was one closer to the storm. "I'll go in first," John said, his voice gruff, as he pulled the reins and stopped his horse in front of the small general store. "Stay out here. Keep an eye out for anything suspicious." Vanessa didn't like it. She didn't like being left behind, but she knew her father was right. The fewer people who saw them, the better. She nodded, her jaw tight, as he dismounted and walked into the store. Vanessa stayed in the saddle, her eyes scanning the street. The tension in the air was palpable, and she could feel the weight of every glance from the townsfolk. Most avoided her gaze, but some seemed to look at her with knowing eyes, eyes that spoke of fear, fear of Victor Dane, fear of what would happen if they crossed him. After what seemed like an eternity, John came back out of the store, his face grave. "Did you find anything?" Vanessa asked, her voice low. John glanced around, ensuring no one was too close. "I talked to a few people, not much, but there's one thing I know for sure. Dane's men are planning something. There's been talk of them coming through here soon, looking for someone. I don't know if it's Sarah or someone else, but I have a bad feeling." Vanessa's stomach churned. The danger was real. They didn't have much time. "Let's go back to the farm," Vanessa said, her voice firm. "We need to prepare. They'll come for us, Pa. I can feel it." John nodded, his eyes hardening with resolve. "We'll be ready for them." As they turned their horses and rode back toward the farm, the weight of the situation settled in like a dark cloud. The town they had grown up in, the place that had always felt like home, was no longer a place of safety. It was a place where the shadows had taken root, where the power of men like Victor Dane held sway over everyone. Vanessa had a choice to make. They all did. Would they keep running, hiding from the storm, or would they fight back? The storm was coming, and Vanessa knew she had to stand her ground. She wasn't running anymore. Not this time. The ride back to the farm was quiet, the silence between Vanessa and her father heavy with unspoken thoughts. The landscape passed by in muted tones, the once familiar rolling hills now feeling like a distant memory. It wasn't the West they had known. It wasn't the place where they could feel safe and at peace anymore. The world had shifted, and now everything they had known was under threat. When they finally reached the farm, the familiar sights of home, John's modest barn, the fields where Vanessa had spent most of her life, felt somehow distant. The place that had once been a refuge now seemed like the calm before a storm, the quiet before the inevitable clash. John dismounted first, his movements deliberate as he tethered the horses to the post near the barn. Vanessa followed suit, but her mind was elsewhere. She had been thinking about Sarah, about the baby, and about what they had to do next. The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders, but there was no room for hesitation now. They were in this for the long haul, whether they liked it or not. "Let's get inside," John said, his voice low. "We need to plan." They entered the house, the familiar scent of wood and dust surrounding them, and Vanessa immediately felt the weight of the situation. She glanced over at Sarah, who was now awake, though still weak, sitting with the baby in her arms. Her expression was one of concern, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes that Vanessa couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a victim of circumstances. She was a woman who had fought to survive, and she wasn't going to let anyone take her or her child again. Vanessa and John took a seat at the small wooden table, and for a few moments there was silence. The ticking of the old clock on the wall was the only sound, its rhythmic ticking reminding them that time was slipping away. "We don't have much time," Vanessa said finally, her voice firm. "Victor Dane's men are out there. They're looking for us. John nodded, his face serious. I know, we need to figure out what our next move is. Sarah, you're not safe here and neither are we. But we can't just keep running. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flickering toward the window. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. I just wanted to keep my son safe. But now they'll come for me, they won't stop. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes soft but determined. We'll fight. We can't let them keep taking people's lives. We'll stand together, whatever it takes. Sarah met Vanessa's gaze, and for the first time, Vanessa saw a flicker of hope in the woman's eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone anymore. But even as they talked, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closer than they realized. There was a tension in the air, something thick and suffocating that told her this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much bigger, something worth fighting for. I'll take a look around tomorrow, John said, his voice steady. I'll see if I can find out what Dane's next move is, but we need to be prepared. He's got his hands in too many things. We have to be ready for anything. Vanessa nodded, her thoughts racing. They had to move quickly. They couldn't afford to wait around and hope for the best. Victor Dane's reach was too long, and they were too exposed here. There had to be a way to stop him, a way to protect Sarah, the baby, and their own lives. Pa, Vanessa said, her voice quieter now. What if we can't stop him? What if we're not enough? John turned toward her, his face unreadable. You know, Vanessa, I don't believe in just sitting back and waiting for the storm to pass. We've fought for everything we've had. This is no different, but we'll have to be smart about it. There was a fire in his eyes, one Vanessa hadn't seen in a long time. He was determined. He wasn't going to let Victor Dane win, not if he could help it. And for the first time, Vanessa realized that she wasn't alone in this fight either. Her father had always been the rock of their small family, and now he was the one leading them into battle. But he needed her just as much as she needed him. We'll do it together, Pa, Vanessa said firmly. I won't let them take everything from us. Sarah, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. I don't know what help I can be, but I'll do whatever I can. I don't want to run anymore. I want to fight for my son, for our future. Vanessa's heart swelled with gratitude. It wasn't just about saving Sarah anymore. It was about standing up to the terror that had infected their town, their lives. They were fighting for more than survival. They were fighting for a chance at peace. Outside, the wind howled, a constant reminder that the danger was ever present, just beyond the horizon. But inside, for the first time in a long while, Vanessa felt something stronger than fear, determination. The storm was coming, but this time they were going to face it head-on, and they wouldn't back down. The sun had barely risen when Vanessa and John made their way to the barn, their minds focused on the task ahead. The quiet of the early morning was almost peaceful, but it didn't last. As they prepared their horses, the weight of the situation was evident on both of their faces. Sarah and the baby were still inside, resting as best as they could, but there was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Vanessa was restless, her thoughts spinning with all the possibilities, most of them bad. She couldn't shake the feeling that Victor Dane was closing in, that they were already too exposed. The people they had tried to trust, the town they had lived in for years, all felt distant now. Vanessa didn't know who to trust, and that made every decision feel like a gamble. We need to know what we're up against, John said, his voice steady as he mounted his horse. If Dane's men are coming, we'll have to get ahead of them. We can't afford to wait for them to show up at our door. Vanessa nodded, her mind already racing with plans. I'll go with you, she said, her voice firm. I need to know what's going on. I can't just sit here and wait. John hesitated, but then he gave a small nod. All right, but we stick together. No going off on your own. This isn't like the usual trips into town. Things have changed. They rode out toward town in silence, the horses' hooves making a steady rhythm against the dusty ground. Vanessa kept her eyes on the horizon, her thoughts drifting between Sarah's plight and the reality of the danger that loomed ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that Victor Dane was already watching them, that every move they made was being monitored. When they reached the outskirts of the town, the familiar buildings loomed ahead, but the town felt off, empty, almost. It was as if the life had been sucked out of it. People avoided looking at them as they rode by, their heads down, their footsteps hurried. It was the kind of atmosphere that made Vanessa's skin crawl. John reined in his horse near the edge of the town. Stay close, he warned, his eyes scanning the streets. We'll check the general store first, see what we can find out. As they dismounted, Vanessa noticed a few men standing outside the saloon, their eyes sharp as they watched the two of them. She didn't recognize them, but the way they looked at her made her blood run cold. It was the look of men who didn't care about right or wrong, only power. John motioned for Vanessa to follow him. leading the way into the store. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the storekeeper, a small, wiry man with graying hair, glanced up, his eyes narrowing when he saw them. "What can I help you with?" the man asked, his tone guarded. "We're looking for information," John said, his voice low and steady. "Anything unusual going on around here? We've been hearing talk about Victor Dane's men moving in." The storekeeper glanced nervously toward the back of the shop, as if he was weighing his words carefully. After a long pause, he lowered his voice and leaned forward. "There's been talk, yes, but you didn't hear it from me." He wiped his hands on a cloth, glancing around again. "Dane's men are tightening their grip. People are scared. I heard a few of them talking last night, saying they're looking for someone. They didn't say who, but there's word that a woman and child have gone missing. They think they might be here." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Sarah and the baby, they were already looking for them. She glanced at her father, his jaw clenched tight. The fear was palpable in the air now, even though the storekeeper tried to mask it. "We're not the only ones who know about them," John said quietly. "There must be others." The storekeeper nodded. "There's a lot of people who don't want to cross Dane, but there's a few of us who are getting tired of it. People are getting ready to fight back, but no one knows when or how. Too many folks are too scared." Vanessa's mind raced. There were people who might help them, but not enough, not yet. And Victor Dane's men weren't going to stop looking. "Thanks for the information," John said, his tone cold now. "We'll be on our way." As they turned to leave, the storekeeper gave a slight nod, but his eyes lingered on them with an unspoken warning. He didn't want to be caught in the middle of whatever was about to happen. Once they were outside, Vanessa's stomach churned with uncertainty. There were no guarantees here. The people who might help them were few, and those who would side with Victor Dane were many. They were walking into a trap. "Let's go back to the farm," John said, his voice grim. "We need to get ready. If they're coming for us, we'll be ready." Vanessa didn't argue. They had no choice but to prepare for the worst. The storm was coming, and it would come for them first. As they rode back toward the farm, Vanessa kept her eyes peeled for any sign of movement in the distance. She could feel it in her gut. Something was shifting. And when it finally hit, it would be a fight for survival. The danger was no longer distant, it was here, and the real battle had just begun. The ride back to the farm felt slower this time. Vanessa's thoughts were heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that Victor Dane's men were already closing in. The town had become a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before the fuse was lit. She could feel the tension in the air as they made their way back to the farmhouse, the familiar landscape now tainted by the uncertainty that lay ahead. As they approached the farm, Vanessa couldn't help but glance nervously toward the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields, and the faint sound of rustling wind seemed to echo the unease she felt. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. John rode ahead, his face set in grim determination. When they reached the barn, he dismounted first, his eyes scanning the area. Vanessa did the same, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and the baby, about the danger they were all facing. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about standing up to Victor Dane, no matter the cost. "We need to make sure the house is secure," John said, his voice low. "They could show up at any moment." Vanessa nodded, already moving toward the house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed open the door, the creak of the wood echoing in the stillness. Inside, Sarah and the baby were still resting, but there was an unsettling calm about the room. It felt like the calm before the storm. Vanessa glanced at her father, who was already checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. He looked at her for a moment, his expression hard but filled with concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" John asked, his voice softer now. Vanessa didn't hesitate. "I have to be." Pa, we can't just sit here and wait for them to come. We have to fight." John studied her for a long moment, his face softening. "I never thought I'd see the day when we'd have to fight like this. But you're right. We're in this together." Vanessa swallowed, her throat tight with emotion, the weight of the decision to fight for their lives. For Sarah and her baby was heavy on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. They couldn't afford to back down. Just as they began to prepare, there was a sharp knock on the door. Vanessa froze, her breath catching in her throat. John looked at her, his face pale but calm, before he motioned for her to stay behind him. He walked slowly toward the door, his hand resting on the rifle by the door. "Stay low," he whispered. Vanessa's heart raced as her father reached for the door. There was no time to think, only to act. When John opened the door, the figure standing outside was not one they expected. "Tommy?" Vanessa's voice cracked with surprise. It was the sheriff, Tommy Larson, standing in the doorway, his face grim. "Tommy, what are you doing here?" John asked, his voice tense. Tommy stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. his eyes quickly scanning the room. "I had to make sure you were all right," he said quietly. "I've been keeping an eye on things. Victor Dane's men are closer than we thought. They're not just coming for Sarah, they're coming for everyone." Vanessa's stomach dropped at the words. "What do you mean, everyone?" "They've been making their rounds, asking questions," Tommy explained. "And they've got a few new recruits, more dangerous than the ones you've dealt with. They'll be here soon, and when they come, they won't leave until they get what they want." Vanessa felt a chill wash over her. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they had a little more time, but it was clear now that the fight was coming to them. There was no more waiting, no more hiding. "What do we do?" Vanessa asked, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. Tommy looked at both of them, his eyes hard with resolve. "We fight back, but we need to be smart. They won't expect you to fight. They'll think you're too scared to stand up to them." Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest as she processed his words. The sheriff wasn't here to arrest anyone. He was here to help them take down Victor Dane's men. But could they do it? Were they prepared for the fight that was coming? Tommy's next words cut through her thoughts. "I've made arrangements," he said. "I've got a few men who are with us, some of the good folks who are tired of living in fear. They'll help us, but we have to move fast. We can't wait for them to come knocking on your door. We need to take the fight to them." John's eyes locked with Tommy's, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of everything was settling in. They had been living in a world where they had to survive by doing whatever it took. But now, it was time to stand up and fight for what they believed in. "We're ready," John said, his voice firm, a quiet resolve settling in his chest. Vanessa's heart surged. This was it. The fight for their survival, for Sarah and the baby's future, was no longer a distant fear. It was right in front of them. Tommy nodded, his face grim but filled with a quiet kind of determination. "Good. It's time to take this fight to them." With that, they began to prepare. The room was filled with the sound of boots shuffling, weapons being checked, and plans being laid. But in the pit of Vanessa's stomach, there was still a gnawing fear. They didn't know how many of Victor Dane's men were out there, or how vicious they would be. But they knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking back their town, their home, and their future. And they were ready to do whatever it took to win. The sky was turning a deep blue as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The farmhouse, once a place of solace, now felt like a war room, each corner filled with an energy that pulsed with nervous anticipation. Vanessa stood by the window, watching the horizon as her mind churned with the plan Tommy and her father had worked out. The moment of truth was coming, and there was no turning back. The sound of boots echoed in the distance as Tommy and his small group of trusted men arrived at the farm. They had been preparing for this moment for days now, each piece of the plan coming together with a quiet urgency. It wasn't just about defending the farm anymore. It was about taking a stand against Victor Dane's reign of terror and showing the town that there were people willing to fight back. John had briefed Tommy's men about the layout of the farm, the routes they'd need to take, and the best places to defend. They had stockpiled what little ammunition they had, and Vanessa had used every skill she learned growing up to prepare for the fight. There was a growing fire in her, one that told her she could face whatever was coming, even though part of her still feared the unknown. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her from the window. "Vanessa, it's time. Are you ready?" Vanessa turned, her face grim but determined. "Ready as I'll ever be, Pa." Sarah, sitting quietly by the fire with the baby in her arms, looked up at Vanessa. Her expression was a mix of gratitude and fear. "You don't have to do this. I can leave. I'll go far away. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Vanessa shook her head, her voice firm. "You're not going anywhere. We fight together, or we don't fight at all. You're part of this now, Sarah, and we're not leaving you behind." John walked over, a hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. "That's right. You're family now. We protect each other. No one's leaving this place." Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes as she looked down at her son. "I'm not used to this," she whispered, "but I'll stand with you, for him." Vanessa felt the weight of her words. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about fighting for a future. And right now that future was worth everything. The first sounds of hooves reached their ears, cutting through the quiet evening. The men Tommy had recruited had taken positions at the edges of the farm, keeping watch for any sign of movement. The rest of the group had positioned themselves in the barn, ready to defend. "We need to move," Tommy said, his voice low and urgent. He looked at Vanessa and her father. "They'll be here any minute. We're not just defending. We're hitting them hard when they show up." Vanessa nodded. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept herself calm. "Where do you want me?" Tommy looked her over, his expression calculating. "You've been in the fields. You know this land better than anyone. I need you on the far end of the property, keeping watch. If any of them try to flank us, you let us know. And if you have a clear shot, take it." Vanessa met his gaze, her determination matching his. "I won't let you down." As Tommy's men took their places, John and Vanessa positioned themselves near the barn, weapons in hand. The night had grown colder, the shadows stretching across the fields like dark fingers reaching toward them. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of the wind in the trees, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. But beneath it all, the tension was palpable, thick as fog. "Stay low, stay quiet," John whispered, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. "They're not expecting a fight. We have the element of surprise. Use it." Vanessa nodded, her breath steady as she crouched near the barn, waiting. The baby's soft cooing from inside the house felt like a reminder of what was at stake. Her thoughts raced with every possible outcome, but there was no turning back now. And then, in the distance, they saw it, the flicker of torchlight cutting through the trees. "They're here," John said quietly, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. It was time. The sound of hooves grew louder as Victor Dane's men approached, their forms becoming visible as they came into the clearing. The wind carried the scent of dust and sweat, but Vanessa didn't focus on anything except their movement. There were too many of them. She could count at least 10 men, all on horseback, their weapons clearly visible. At the head of the group was the man Vanessa had seen before, the same one who had threatened them in the woods, the one who had been after Sarah, Victor Dane's right-hand man. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the rifle, her eyes trained on the group as they drew nearer. Her father was right beside her, every inch of him alert, ready for action. As the men moved closer, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. Tommy's voice came through the darkness. "Now!" Gunshots rang out. The night erupted in chaos. Vanessa's heart raced as she took her shot, hitting one of the riders off his horse. The man collapsed to the ground with a grunt, his body disappearing into the dust. The sound of gunfire continued as the rest of the group scrambled for cover. "Stay down!" John shouted, pulling Vanessa behind the barn. "We've got this, just keep your head down." But it was too late. The battle had begun. Dane's men weren't backing down, and neither were they. The fight for their survival had come to them. Vanessa's breath was coming in quick gasps as she peered over the barn, watching the chaotic scene unfold. Tommy and his men were firing from the shadows, taking out the enemy with precise shots, but they were outnumbered, and the fight was only just beginning. She had no choice now but to see it through, to fight for what they had, for Sarah, for the baby, for their future. And as the gunfire echoed around them, Vanessa knew that this night would determine everything. The night had descended into chaos. Gunfire echoed through the air, a violent symphony of clashing forces. Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest, her hands steady as she reloaded her rifle, her eyes fixed on the enemy as they regrouped near the edge of the property. The dim glow of torches flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the field as Dane's men tried to find cover. From the barn, she could see Tommy and his men exchanging fire with the attackers. Her father, John, was right beside her, his face set with a grim determination. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Vanessa's mind was clear, focused. She wasn't just defending her home anymore. She was defending her family, the future she'd hoped to build. And Sarah, the woman who had brought this storm to their doorstep, was relying on her. The sounds of horses' hooves and distant gunfire filled the air as the attackers attempted to flank the property. But Tommy's men were holding their ground. Vanessa knew they didn't have long before Dane's men regrouped and came in full force. "Vanessa!" her father called, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to get them out of here. Now!" Vanessa looked toward the house where Sarah was still inside with the baby, hidden away from the chaos. Her pulse quickened at the thought of her, of them being so close to danger. The fight outside was nothing compared to what could happen if they got too close to the house. "We're going to draw them out," John said, as if reading her thoughts. He gripped his rifle tightly, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "I'll cover you. You get to the house and get Sarah and the baby ready to move. We can't stay here." Vanessa hesitated, the weight of her father's words sinking deep into her chest. But there was no time for second thoughts. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions. She had to act. "I'll be quick," she said, her voice steady. "Go," John ordered, his eyes hard with determination. Vanessa didn't waste another second. She darted from behind the barn, keeping low to the ground, her body tense as she made her way toward the house. The gunfire continued around her, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. Every footstep, every movement could be the difference between life and death. As she reached the back door of the farmhouse, she pushed it open carefully, slipping inside. Sarah was there, still sitting by the fire with the baby in her arms, looking up at her with wide, fearful eyes. "Vanessa, what's happening?" Sarah's voice trembled as she stood up, clutching the baby closer to her chest. "They're coming," Vanessa said, her voice low but urgent. "We need to leave now." Sarah's face paled, but she nodded quickly, understanding the gravity of the situation. She rose to her feet, her eyes filled with fear for the baby, but also a quiet strength that Vanessa hadn't seen before. "We can't stay here. Where do we go?" Sarah asked, her voice strained. "Come with me," Vanessa urged, grabbing her by the arm. "We have a safe place. My father and I set it up. We'll be safer there." Without another word, they hurried toward the back door. As Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, she could see the dark shapes of men closing in on the farm, their voices muffled by the wind. They weren't far now. Just as they reached the edge of the yard, the unmistakable sound of horse hooves and shouting broke through the night. Dane's men had arrived. "Vanessa!" her father's voice rang out from the distance. "Go, now!" Vanessa didn't hesitate. She pushed Sarah toward the barn and took off in a sprint. Her father's warning echoed in her mind. "We need to draw them out." As they reached the barn, Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. They had made it so far, but it wasn't enough. They weren't safe yet. Her father was there, standing just inside the barn's open doors, his rifle raised, his eyes focused on the men who had gathered at the edge of the property. His movements were controlled, calculated. He wasn't just defending, they were setting a trap. "Vanessa, get Sarah inside the barn," he ordered sharply, his eyes locked on the approaching threat. Vanessa didn't question him. She grabbed Sarah by the arm again, pulling her inside the barn, away from the line of fire. The barn doors creaked as they closed, leaving them in relative darkness. The only sounds were the distant shouts and the pounding of footsteps outside. Vanessa's breath was quick and shallow. "We have to do something," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. She was gripping her baby tighter now, her body trembling with the tension of the moment. "We're going to survive this," Vanessa said, her voice firm, though she could feel the fear bubbling up inside her. She wasn't sure what the plan was, but her father had always known what to do. She just had to trust him. Outside, the gunfire continued as Tommy and his men gave them cover, but there was no denying it. The tide was turning. The attackers were getting closer, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. Suddenly, there was a loud crash at the door of the barn. The lock snapped, the wooden doors giving way under the pressure. "They're here," Vanessa said, her voice low but filled with determination. "Stay low," John shouted from outside the barn. His voice was a rallying cry. Vanessa and Sarah crouched near the back of the barn, the baby's soft whimpers filling the silence. They had no time to waste. The storm had arrived. With the next move, everything would change. But for now, they had to hold on. The barn doors splintered under the pressure of the approaching attackers, the heavy thuds of boots on the ground growing louder with each passing second. Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest, the fear mingling with the resolve that had built up inside her since the first gunshot rang out. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was their chance to take back their future. The barn was dim, the shadows long and oppressive, but Vanessa's eyes were sharp. Her focus honed in on the sounds outside. Her father was out there fighting for them, buying them time. She had to keep moving. She had to protect the people she loved. "Stay down," she whispered to Sarah, who was crouched beside her, the baby in her arms still and quiet, a reminder of everything they were fighting for. Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'll follow you, I trust you." Vanessa's mind raced as she calculated their next move. They couldn't stay in the barn much longer. Dane's men were closing in on their position, and they were running out of options. She peeked out through a crack in the barn's weathered wooden walls and saw movement, at least 5 men surrounding the farm. They were methodical, like hunters, and it was clear they were closing in for the kill. Her father's voice, distant but steady, rang through the air. "We can't hold them off for long, Vanessa. We need a plan." Vanessa's eyes darted to the back of the barn, where a small trapdoor led to an underground storage area. It was the only route that hadn't been compromised yet. If they could make it to the underground passage, they might have a chance to escape, but it was risky, and it would require them to move fast. "Follow me," Vanessa said, her voice tight. "We're going underground. We can't stay out here. It's the only way out." Sarah hesitated, glancing at the baby in her arms, but Vanessa could see the same determination in her eyes. She nodded, and slowly, carefully, the two of them made their way toward the trapdoor. As they reached it, Vanessa took one last look at the barn's main entrance. The men were getting closer. It wouldn't be long before they were at the door. "Ready?" Vanessa asked, her breath catching in her throat. Sarah nodded, her hands shaking. "As ready as I'll ever be." Vanessa grabbed the latch and pulled the trapdoor open. revealing the dark, narrow steps leading down into the cool underground storage area. She motioned for Sarah to go first, then followed closely behind. The scent of earth and dust filled the air as they descended, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick wooden beams above. They reached the bottom, and Vanessa's eyes adjusted to the dim light. The space was cramped, filled with old crates and barrels, but it was their only chance. She pressed a hand to the wall, trying to steady her racing heart. "We need to be quiet," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah nodded, clutching the baby even tighter, her face a mixture of fear and determination. They had no way of knowing how much time they had. The walls felt like they were closing in on them, but there was no turning back now. The storm outside was relentless, and if they were going to survive, they had to fight. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from above, followed by the unmistakable sound of the barn doors being forced open. Panic surged through Vanessa's chest. They couldn't afford to be discovered. She grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her deeper into the storage area, where shadows swallowed them whole. Outside, the sounds of shouting and gunfire intensified. The storm was here, and it was no longer just a fight for their survival. It was a fight to the end. Tommy's voice echoed through the underground space, low and strained, but unmistakable. "Vanessa, Sarah, you need to move now." The voice was a beacon of hope, and Vanessa knew Tommy was doing everything he could to hold off Dane's men. But the clock was ticking, and they had no time to waste. They needed to get out, and fast. "Let's go," Vanessa urged, leading Sarah toward the far end of the storage area, where another exit, hidden behind a stack of crates, waited. The path was narrow, but it led them to the back of the farm, where they could make a run for the woods. As they moved, Vanessa's thoughts were consumed with one thing: survival. They had to make it out alive. They had to fight. The trapdoor above them creaked as footsteps thundered overhead, but they didn't stop. Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the hidden exit and pushed it open. The cold night air hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she thought they might have a chance. But then, a voice cut through the darkness, sharp and commanding. "There they are." The shout echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of galloping horses. Vanessa didn't think. She grabbed Sarah's arm again, pulling her into the woods as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Her feet stumbled over the rough ground, her lungs burning with the effort, but she didn't stop. The world had turned against them, but they weren't going down without a fight. Her father's voice came through the chaos, steady and full of resolve. "Keep moving. I'll hold them off." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat as she heard the sound of a rifle shot ring out. She didn't know what had happened, but there was no time to stop. They ran through the night, the darkness swallowing them whole as the storm raged on. The woods were their only refuge now, the only place they could hide from the madness that had overtaken their world. The fight was far from over, but they would survive, no matter the cost. Vanessa's lungs burned as she sprinted through the thick forest, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Sarah, clutching the baby tightly to her chest, was just a few paces behind her. The sound of hooves pounding the dirt was growing closer, a chilling reminder that they were being hunted. Her mind raced, every instinct screaming for survival as she pushed through the underbrush, her body aching but her resolve stronger than ever. "We can't stop," Vanessa panted, glancing over her shoulder. The men chasing them were relentless, but she wouldn't let them catch up. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "We need to keep moving," Sarah gasped, her voice strained but filled with determination. "But where are we going? Vanessa, how do we escape?" Vanessa's mind raced. She had no answers. She didn't know where they could go, but the desperation in Sarah's voice fueled her. They had no choice but to keep running, even if it meant heading deeper into the woods. "Keep going," Vanessa urged, pushing forward, her eyes scanning the dark forest ahead. She could barely see through the night, but she knew that somewhere out there was a chance, a place where they could hide, where they could be safe. Suddenly, the sound of shouting broke through the trees. It was too close. Vanessa's stomach twisted with fear as she pushed forward, the branches scraping against her skin. The tension in the air felt suffocating, like the world was closing in around them. "Vanessa!" John's voice rang out from the distance, strong and familiar. "Over here!" Vanessa's heart leapt in her chest as she turned toward the sound of her father's voice. She pushed harder, urging Sarah to follow. She didn't know what was ahead, but she had to trust that her father had a plan. They reached a clearing, and there, standing in the middle of the moonlit forest, was John. He was holding his rifle, his face set in grim determination. "Get down!" he shouted, his voice sharp. Vanessa and Sarah dropped to the ground, taking cover behind a large rock. They watched as John took his position, aiming his rifle at the group of men who had been chasing them. The sound of horses grew louder, and Vanessa could hear the men shouting, their voices full of anger and frustration. "You don't have to do this, John," one of the men yelled, his voice thick with disdain. "We're just looking for the woman. Let us take her and we'll leave you all alone." John's response was immediate, his voice low and cold. "Not a chance." Vanessa's pulse quickened as she saw her father aim the rifle. The tension was unbearable. Would he shoot? Would he make it out alive? The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as she watched the men slowly advance, unaware of the trap her father had set. Then, with a sharp crack, John fired. The first man fell from his horse, a cloud of dust swirling around him as he hit the ground with a thud. The others scattered, shouting in panic as they tried to regroup. Vanessa's heart raced, but she didn't dare move. The fight had only just begun. "Stay down," John ordered, his voice calm but urgent. Vanessa clenched her fists, her eyes trained on the unfolding chaos. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking back control, about showing that they weren't afraid. They wouldn't be victims of Victor Dane any longer. They were going to fight for their future. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the trees as the men returned fire. Vanessa could feel her father's steady presence, his calm in the midst of the storm. He wasn't just protecting them, he was leading them. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the men slowly being pushed back one by one. Vanessa's eyes never left her father. She could see the determination in his face, but there was something else there too. Something that told her they were almost through it. They were so close to winning this fight. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the gunfire stopped. The forest fell silent. The men who had been chasing them were gone, retreating into the darkness, their footsteps fading into the night. Vanessa breathed a sigh of relief, her body trembling with the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. So it was over, for now. John stepped forward, lowering his rifle. His face was etched with exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of pride in his eyes as he looked at Vanessa. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse but full of relief. Vanessa's chest tightened as she rushed toward him, her arms wrapping around him in a fierce hug. She had been so afraid they would lose everything. But now, standing together, they had made it through. They were still standing. "Thank you, Pa," Vanessa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't have done it without you." Her father smiled softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We did it together, Vanessa, we all did." Sarah stepped forward, holding the baby close. Her face was still pale, but there was a sense of peace in her eyes that had been absent before. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped us." Vanessa met her gaze and nodded. "We're family now. We look out for each other." As the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the forest, Vanessa allowed herself a moment to breathe. The storm had passed, and though the future was still uncertain, they had survived, they had won. And now, for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but they had shown that no matter how dark the world got, they were ready to face it together. And nothing, not even Victor Dane, could take that away from them.